Hello everyone. Isaiah 44:6. Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts, I am the first and I am the last, and there is no God besides me. So we're just going to focus on this part of the verse. Trinitarians make a certain claim concerning just this part of the verse. And so what that claim starts from is the idea that the word his, the King of Israel and his Redeemer, is referring to Yahweh. His is referring to Yahweh. And when Trinitarians make this claim, they make this assumption, or they imply this idea. His equals Yahweh. And so when you read the words his Redeemer, it means Yahweh's Redeemer. And his Redeemer is further identified as Yahweh of hosts. So Yahweh's Redeemer is being identified as Yahweh of hosts. Okay, this is the Trinitarian interpretation. And who is Yahweh's Redeemer? But Jesus. And so Trinitarians will ultimately claim that Jesus is here being identified as Yahweh of hosts. Therefore, Jesus is Yahweh, Jesus is God. You know the routine. Let's just illustrate what's wrong with this interpretation. And we can do that by looking at a verse that has kind of a similar construction. So in Isaiah 44:6, we have, Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts. And so this means, Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel, and Yahweh's Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts. Then you resort to your imagination. You go, oh, who's Yahweh's Redeemer but Jesus? Therefore, Jesus is being identified as Yahweh of hosts. So that's Isaiah 44:6. But look at Isaiah 45:11. Very similar kind of statement with different titles. Thus says Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel, and Yahweh's Maker? Okay. It says, Thus says Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel, and his Maker. Should we suppose this refers to Yahweh's Maker? What's that going to mean? Does Yahweh have a Maker? And so in Isaiah 44:6, Trinitarians presume, at least some Trinitarians, presume the word his refers to Yahweh. To be consistent then, you would have to do the same thing at Isaiah 45:11. And suppose Yahweh has a maker. Yahweh's maker, his maker. If you're going to be consistent, you'd have to interpret that verse in the same way. And you should be able to see how that's going to create problems for you. Yahweh and his Maker, Yahweh and his Redeemer. So the whole Trinitarian claim here that Jesus is being identified Yahweh starts with this idea that the word his means is referring to Yahweh. Yahweh's Redeemer. If we were consistent, we would have to say Isaiah 45:11 meant Yahweh's Maker. But we're going to see the truth of the matter is that the word his does not refer to Yahweh. The word his refers to Israel, also known as Jacob in Isaiah the prophet's writings. His Redeemer equals Israel's Redeemer, not Yahweh's Redeemer. We'll see that quite clearly in a moment here. If you check a few translations, you'll see that Trinitarian translation scholars know that this is actually what's going on. For example, the NIV has, "This is what the Lord says, Israel's King and Redeemer." Okay, Israel's Redeemer. Not Yahweh's Redeemer, Israel's Redeemer. And the same with the Net Bible. "This is what the Lord, Israel's King, says, their protector." And you can see here that Net Bible has changed the word his into their, because the translator knows that the word his refers to the people of Israel. Their protector or their redeemer. The Net Bible has chosen to translate the word as protector instead of redeemer here. Okay? You can see they know this is what's going on. Yet Trinitarian apologists generally don't care. They want to try to make this claim that Jesus is being identified as Yahweh in this verse by supposing that Yahweh's Redeemer is Jesus and the word his refers to Yahweh. "Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts." And so now we'll see the word his refers to Israel. It's not referring to Yahweh. So you would have to ask, why does Yahweh use the word his to refer to the nation of Israel, a collection of people? Okay? And that's an important question to ask, and we'll see what's going on here with Isaiah right away. First of all, you have to realize why the nation of Israel is called Israel. It's because they're all the descendants of Israel. Jacob. Jacob was also known as Israel. And Genesis 32:28 tells us this. This is after his struggle with the angel. And it reads, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." So Jacob has this other name, Israel. And all his descendants are called Israel because he was called Israel. A very common idea in the ancient Middle East. For example, if you read something like, I'll just make something up here, Anak came and destroyed our city. It doesn't necessarily mean Anak was even there. It would be clear to an ancient reader that this meant Anak's descendants, or perhaps Anak and his descendants, it's kind of vague there, destroyed the city. A collection of people destroyed the city, and that would just be a way of speaking. And the same sort of thing happens with Israel. Israel got its name from one person, Jacob, or Israel. We do something similar today in our surnames. A father might have several sons and daughters. They all have the same surname. You know, they might be the Johnson family. Well, here we're talking about the family of Israel. And they have one progenitor, Jacob, or Israel. So that's where the idea starts. And the second thing that's really important here is that when you read Isaiah, you'll see that Isaiah the prophet routinely portrays the nation of Israel as a single man, Yahweh's servant. and he calls Yahweh's servant Jacob or Israel several times. And so he's portraying the nation of Israel like a single man. So let's look at some examples of that. From Isaiah chapter 40, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that her warfare is ended, that her iniquity is pardoned, that she has received from Yahweh's hand double for all her sins. Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from Yahweh?" See how Isaiah is referring to the nation of Israel as Jacob or Israel? Just like the one man, Jacob, was called Jacob or Israel. And there's several examples of this in the book of Isaiah. There's quite a few, actually. Here's another one from Isaiah 41. "But you, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I have chosen, descendant of Abraham my friend, you whom I have taken from the ends of the earth, and called from its remotest parts, and said to you, you are my servant. I have chosen you and not rejected you. Do not fear, you worm Jacob, you men of Israel. I will help you, declares Yahweh, and your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel." You see that? It's very clear. If you really just, look a few chapters ahead of Isaiah 44, a few chapters behind, and you'll see this thing all over the place. And notice here in Isaiah 41, when he's referring to your Redeemer, it's referring to Jacob's Redeemer or Israel's Redeemer. Isaiah 43, "But now thus says Yahweh, your Creator, O Jacob, and he who formed you, O Israel." So you see how it's either Israel or Jacob. "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you." Yahweh is Israel's Redeemer. "I have called you by name, you are mine, says the Lord, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. I am Yahweh, your Holy One, the Creator of Israel, your King." Similar language to Isaiah 44:6. "Yet you have not called on me, O Jacob, but you have become weary of me, O Israel. I will consign Jacob to the ban and Israel to the revilement." Very clear again. And again, you see how Isaiah is saying, or God is saying through the prophet Isaiah, that he is Israel's Redeemer, or Jacob's Redeemer, the nation of Israel. "Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer." The antecedent for the word his here isn't Yahweh. It's Israel, the King of Israel, and Israel's Redeemer. The King of Israel and his Redeemer, Israel's Redeemer. And the immediate context also shows us quite clearly that this is what's going on. So let's just read that really quickly, and I've kind of condensed it here. "But now listen, O Jacob, my servant, like a single man, and Israel, whom I have chosen. Thus says Yahweh, who made you and formed you from the womb, who will help you. Do not fear, O Jacob, my servant." Not servants, plural, servant. "And you, Jeshurun, whom I have chosen, for I will pour out water on the thirsty land and streams on the dry ground. I will pour out my spirit on your offspring and my blessing on your descendants. And they will spring up among the grass like poplars by streams of water. This one will say, I am Yahweh's, and that one will call on the name of Jacob, And another will write on his hand, belonging to Yahweh, and will name Israel's name with honor. Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel and Jacob's Redeemer, or Israel's Redeemer. His Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts. I am the first and I am the last, and there is no God besides me. Remember these things, O Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. I have formed you, you are my servant, O Israel. You will not be forgotten by me, for Yahweh has redeemed Jacob, and in Israel he shows forth his glory. Thus says Yahweh, your Redeemer. Yahweh's servant's Redeemer, the nation of Israel. And just really look at how Isaiah is portraying the nation of Israel like a single man, like a servant, a single servant. And notice the redemption language here. The King of Israel and his Redeemer. For Yahweh has redeemed Jacob. Thus says Yahweh, your Redeemer. When you start looking at this context, it becomes very clear that his Redeemer is referring to Israel's Redeemer. And let's remind ourselves of these two verses again and compare these. The King of Israel and his Redeemer. What's the antecedent for the word his? Israel. Same thing at Isaiah 45:11. The antecedent of the word his in his maker is Israel. It's not Yahweh. The antecedent of the word his is Israel. Same thing at Isaiah 44:6. Israel's Redeemer, Isaiah 45:11, Israel's Maker. And Isaiah uses that kind of language quite a bit about Israel. God created Israel. God formed Israel in the womb. God is Israel's Maker. So when we look at that word his, and we appreciate the facts of the context, and how the same sort of thing is done at Isaiah 45:11, it really becomes very clear that his Redeemer means Israel's Redeemer, not Yahweh's Redeemer. Israel's Redeemer is Yahweh of hosts, the King of Israel. So what we have here is, thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel. Okay, Yahweh's the King of Israel. So is King David, by the way. And that's because King David represented Yahweh. And that's why it says King David sat on the throne of Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel. And Israel's Redeemer. Who is Israel's Redeemer? Yahweh of hosts. So Yahweh is saying this. It's being emphasized that Israel's Redeemer is Yahweh of hosts. Who is saying this? Israel's Redeemer is Yahweh of hosts, the King of Israel. Let's remember one last thing. Jesus was an Israelite, a member of the nation of Israel. Thus says Yahweh, the King of Israel, and Israel's Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts. When you look at these facts, it should be quite clear that this Trinitarian claim is extremely lame. And as we saw, Trinitarian translators know that it's referring to Israel's Redeemer, not referring to Jesus as Yahweh's Redeemer. Trinitarians are just basically imagining their doctrine into the text. Oh, Yahweh's Redeemer is Jesus, therefore Jesus is being called Yahweh of hosts. But as we have seen, that's just not what's going on. Isaiah, or rather Yahweh speaking through the prophet Isaiah, that's what prophets do, is referring to Israel's Redeemer. Yahweh isn't referring to his own Redeemer, someone he has commissioned to redeem on his behalf. Although you might want to argue that's a true idea, that's not what is being said in this verse. The word his refers to Israel. It doesn't refer to Yahweh. And once you realize that, you'll realize this Trinitarian claim doesn't have any merit whatsoever. It's just lame. And Trinitarian translation scholars, they know it. It just seems that most Trinitarian apologists really don't care. That their own translation scholars know this. That's quite common. Some people just don't care about the biblical facts. God bless you.